Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pulse of Israel with Avi Abelo here in the ancestral and eternal homeland of the Jewish people, the land of Israel. Today, I will be speaking with someone I respect for years, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, professor, expert on the Middle East and Islam. And let us welcome Dr. Kedar. Shalom, Dr. Kedar.
Shalom, shalom, Avi. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank God, staying home and staying healthy. I hope you and your whole family are doing well.
All the same.
So we are going through a very tumultuous election in the United States of America that does not just have implications for America and Americans, but also not just on the Middle East, but the whole world. And you, as an expert of the Middle East, I'm very interested in hearing your take on how, the impact of Donald Trump for America in terms of his Middle East policy, and what these elections basically what impact they might have if President Trump wins or if Joe Biden would enter the White House. So please, what do you have to say, Dr. Kedar?
Well, look, I'm not willing to interfere in domestic American issues because I have very little knowledge about what happens inside America, but definitely in the Middle East, there is a very, very significant difference between what we saw from the Trump administration during the last 4 years and what happened before when the other administrations were there. The main, I would say, implication would be on the question of Iran. Because what we saw during the last 4 years, totally different policy vis-a-vis the policies which were taken beforehand. For example, the fact that the United States went out of the JCPOA of the 2015 and actually renewed the sanctions on Iran. These two things were the major change of the American policy which was made in the last 4 years. And this actually, in my view, what saved the Middle East. Because Iran, if it was emboldened as it was, due to the JCPOA and the money which they got afterwards, and without sanctions, Iran could devastate the whole Middle East as it was doing until recently. We saw the wars in Yemen, which recently is not so, the flames are much lower. We saw how Iran took over Iraq. Today, the Iraqis feel much more comfortable to resist. We saw what happens in Syria. And Syria today tries maybe to open some gates with Jerusalem, and we'll talk about this later. And Lebanon, which until a couple of years ago was the front yard of Iran, now because of the weakness which fell upon Iran because of the American administration, Lebanon is actually starting some talks with Israel about marking the naval border between Israel and Lebanon, because Lebanon now is on the verge of bankruptcy, and Hezbollah is on the verge of bankruptcy because of the American sanctions on Iran. On Iran means that the sanctions actually work, and Lebanon so far survived from falling into Hezbollah's hands. And definitely, what happened in the last a year, where the sanctions already have some kind of effect on Iran, we can definitely see how Iran is getting less influential in the Middle East, especially on those arenas which suffered tremendously because of the Iranian intervention in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. If the American policy is changed and America goes back to the JCPOA and lifts the sanctions from Iran, the problems of the Middle East will be as they were until 3 or 4 years ago. Much worse. Wars, bloodshed, and the worst of all is of course, the loss of lives, but the refugees. And this is what actually happened after the JCPOA was signed. We all remember the giant wave of refugees which flooded Europe, and some of them came also to the United States in 2015. And this was the indirect result of the signing of the JCPOA. Because as long as this agreement was not signed, people in the Middle East had some hope that Iran will actually let them live in a way or another. But when Iran got the JCPOA and no sanctions and the money which they got from the Obama administration, they were so emboldened that millions of people ran away from the Middle East because they were afraid of the wars which Iran is behind. So that's actually the indirect result of the JCPOA, the wave of refugees which ran away from the Middle East to Europe, at least partially. Those who came from Syria, from Iraq, through Turkey. The refugees who came from Africa came for different reasons, but definitely those hundreds of thousands who came from Syria and Iraq and other countries in the Eastern Middle East came because of the JCPOA and the lifting of the sanctions and the money, the $150 billion which America got from the Obama administration. Now, if Trump has to leave the White House and the policies vis-a-vis Iran will be changed, the Middle East will sink again into these bloody wars which Iran was funneling in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, and maybe Lebanon as well. Israel will suffer, and Europe will suffer again because of refugees. And don't forget that some of those refugees came to the States as well. It will be again.
So let me
Yes.
No, finish your thought, and then I had a question about the JCPOA.
Means that the elections in the States have an indirect implications on the Middle East, yet very, very significant. And this is the situation, unfortunately, but this is the situation.
So people in the Biden camp, and I've been hearing this for a long time, even before the Biden camp, but I guess from the Democratic side of the aisle in America, ever since President Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, they say that Trump actually has led to Iran being closer to the bomb and to Iran being even a greater danger with nuclear power, and therefore he is more of a danger, and Iran will be more dangerous, and we have to get out of office, and we have to go back to the JCPOA, so we have those restrictions on Iran being able to develop nuclear weapons. How do you respond to that?
Well, this is first of all incorrect, because everybody knows that the JCPOA, with the inspection of the IAEA, could not stop Iran from going forward on its plan to acquire nuclear weapons. All the mechanisms of inspection which were made by the JCPOA were insufficient to stop Iran. So to say that coming out of the JCPOA actually opened the gate for Iran to continue its nuclear program, it's first of all incorrect. Mm-hmm. Iran could do it even inside the JCPOA. Of course, it would be a clandestine program. Now, since the JCPOA is not binding anymore, they can do it in the open air. This is the whole difference. Yet, since I don't believe even one word which the Iranians say, I didn't believe that they will bind themselves to the conditions of the JCPOA anyway. So this is why I thought that the JCPOA was a giant fraud and deception by the Iranians. And unfortunately, the people in America and in France, in Britain, in Russia, and in China fell into this trap. First of all, the Russians and the Chinese are in bed with the Iranians. So definitely they would shut their eyes in order not to see the breaching of the JCPOA by Iran. Yet I would expect that the Americans and the British and the French and the Germans, who know already about the Iranian way of conduct, would be more careful with the JCPOA. But unfortunately, they were not, because they were pushed from behind by an agenda which came from the White House in those days, which wanted to come to the JCPOA at any price. And this is the problem. And since the Iranians understood that the Americans will sign any agreement in order to sign any agreement, so they allowed themselves to do whatever they like. This is why I don't believe even one word which they say or sign. So, especially when, let me give you a little example. The agreement says that inspection has to give the Iranians 20-something days in advance before the inspection. Avi, within 20 days, they can clean everything. So even if the inspection wants to go to some kind of a place or a site, and they have to give them 20 days in advance, at least 20 days in advance of a notice, it was nothing. This is no inspection. Inspection is, hey guys, we are here, please open the gates, we want to see what is there is inside now.
Right.
And they have to open. But of course, the Iranians did not agree to such a thing. So they agreed to 20 and more days for inspection, so it actually makes the inspection worth nothing. And this is the JCPOA. In addition, JCPOA was only for 15 years. Okay? We are already 5 years later. Means in 10 years from today, the Iranians can do whatever they like, according to the JCPOA. So, who with the right mind would sign such a thing? So, the JCPOA was a bad agreement to begin with. And thank goodness that Trump came out of it and really maintained pressure on Iran in order to convince the Iranians to stop interfering in other countries' issues. And definitely we see through the last few years that the Iranians are calmer. Of course, they hit Saudi Arabia a year ago in September. They are trying to support all kinds of militias and terror organizations. Yet, if you compare their activity today or along 2020, which is already more than 10 months already, you can definitely see that the profile of the Iranian activities against other countries in the Middle East and beyond maybe as well is lower because of their financial problems. Look, they cannot sponsor Hezbollah these days. So Hezbollah allows the Lebanese state to start negotiations with Israel. This is only because of the sanctions on Iran. Okay, indirectly. Okay, so this is what I mean. If the elections in the states will change the administration, and the other administration will lift the sanctions and renew the American commitments according to the JCPOA, Iran will come back to be as emboldened as it was in 2015 and will devastate states like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Israel tried to do to Israel as well. And the chances of war are much higher.
Right.
So this is the situation.
Right. So right now we're focusing on the huge we're you're focusing on the huge impact the change of an administration would have vis-a-vis Iran policy, which would then make a huge impact not only on the whole Middle East, but also the rest of the world, Europe and America, because of the violence that would erupt here once again, like during the Obama-Biden years. Let me ask you about another country before we get into Lebanon and Syria. The other if I understand correctly, the Middle East, there are two major problem states in the Middle East that basically want to control much more of the Middle East and have more power in the world. One is Iran, and the other is Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. What's going on in terms of policy vis-a-vis Turkey and their aspirations?
Well, in order to explain this, you have to understand the Middle East of the last couple of years. Once there was an Arab world. Well, I have news for you, Avi. There is no Arab world anymore. What you have today is two parts of what was the Arab world, hostile to each other, and actually two coalitions which are one against the other. If you remember the Warsaw Pact against NATO, now you have the same thing inside the Middle East. What you have in one coalition is Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Qatar, Gaza, with the support of Turkey, Russia, and China from the outside. Vis-a-vis another coalition, which is Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, supported from the outside by the United States of America. These are the two coalitions, and they actually fight each other on Yemen, on Iraq, on Syria, and Lebanon also. Could be, the problems in Lebanon are also part of the same thing. And this is actually the current Middle East. It's not the new Middle East which Shimon Peres was dreaming about. This is violent Middle East. This is divided Middle East. This is a Middle East which is hostile, or two parts which are hostile to each other. And in this case, and in this situation, in this constellation, Israel becomes the solution after it was for many years the problem. And this is actually what stands behind the peace which we have now, not the peace, the normalization, which is way beyond peace, between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. And people talk about Saudi Arabia as a country which agreed to the whole thing. Otherwise, Bahrain and the Emirates would not proceed with Israel to a normalization, which is way beyond peace. So this is what we have today. Turkey is part of the Iranian pact. And Turkey, of course, and there are no free lunch. Turkey wants, not Turkey, Erdogan and his party, the Islamic Party, which are working according to the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. They want to restore the Ottoman hegemony over the Middle East. After all, they were here for 400 years, exactly between 1517 and 1917. They want to return to Jerusalem, which was under their occupation for 400 years, and to save Jerusalem from the Jewish occupation, and to establish a Muslim Brotherhood state under the hegemony of the Turks, as it was along the Ottoman Empire. This is what Erdogan wants, and this is actually what puts him as an enemy to the Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabian coalition, because Saudi Arabia hates the Muslim Brotherhood with Erdogan alike. So this is actually the two blocks of the Middle East. Turkey tries to take advantage of this divide and to get all kinds of influence on places like Jerusalem and they invest big money in Jerusalem in order to buy businesses, to buy real estate, and to be influential in the Temple Mount, means in Al-Aqsa, while Israel tries, not so hard, to push the Turks back, which I'm not sure that how Israel is doing it, if at all. But Israelis are very, very much
You
concerned.
mean trying to push them back out of Jerusalem and out of the Temple Mount? Is that what you're referring to?
Look, it's not. You cannot. We have peace with them. We have embassies, and Israel is a democracy. But Turkey today has very, very significant influence on what happens in Jerusalem. If you walk in Jerusalem, the old city, you can see so many Turkish flags over businesses. They funnel much money, big money, into the Jerusalem, Eastern Jerusalem markets. They buy real estate. They renovate all kind of places. And there are actually at least 2 Turkish culture centers in Jerusalem to teach Turkish and to teach the people in Jerusalem how good Turkey was, and to make them forget how the Turks controlled this country for 400 years with a kurbaj, which is a leash, and with a mashnaka, which is the hanging bar, and with a chazuk. And I'll spare you the description what it was, how they were skewing people to death, the Turks, in order to torture them. And this is how they treated the Arabs in the Middle East. Now they try to make the Arabs forget how badly they were treated by the Turks and to remember only the good aspects. Okay, so this is what happens today with Turkey. Turkey wants influence in Syria in order to make sure that the Kurds will never have a state in Syria. The Turks have much to do in Libya because they want to resuscitate the Sarraj government in Libya, because this government signed with the Turks an agreement which divides the Middle East, the Mediterranean Sea, between Turkey and Libya, against the other divisions which were between Israel and Cyprus and all kinds of states which think that they have the right to take advantage of the gas which is under the seabed of the Mediterranean. Now Turkey explores gas inside the waters of Cyprus, violating the sovereignty of Cyprus, because Turkey thinks that the Mediterranean Sea belongs to Turkey and Libya. So this is what Turkey today. Erdogan tries to spread its hegemony. Don't forget the Turkish support to Azerbaijan, alongside with Israel, by the way, against the Iranian support to Armenia in the fights in Nagorno-Karabakh recently. So definitely the interests here of Turkey are actually go to all kinds of places, to Azerbaijan, to Libya, to Israel, to Gaza. Don't forget the Marmara ship. They go to Jerusalem, they go to Iraq as well. And wherever they can stick their hands, that's what they do. And in order to restore the Ottoman, I wouldn't say empire, but the Ottoman influence over the Middle East.
So what is U.S. policy currently, and is there any implication in terms of the elections of American policy on the Middle East vis-a-vis Turkey?
Again, Turkey today, I think, is viewed by the administration as the bad boy of the Middle East, or one of the bad boys of the Middle East, because Erdogan actually supports the Muslim Brotherhood. And as you know, the Muslim Brotherhood today became a persona non grata in the White House. Just to remind everybody that during the Obama administration, the Muslim Brotherhood in general and their organization in the United States, the CAIR, Committee on Islamic American Relations, were actually people who went in and out the White House night and day. And
Yeah, the Obama White House had an open door policy. Muslim Brotherhood officials not only were invited into the White House, they were given roles in federal office.
right, and this is why there is a good chance that if Trump has to leave the White House, the Muslim Brotherhood will come back to their status as it was under the Obama administration, and will influence the policy of the Middle East against Saudi Arabia, against the Emirates, against Bahrain, for Turkey, for Iran, and actually America will shift from being the superpower behind the coalition of Saudi Arabia, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, and Morocco, will join the Russians and the Chinese by supporting the other coalition of Iran, Turkey, and Iraq, and all the others, which are actually against the coalition of Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Wow, that's that to me. To me, that's just a bombshell of information that you just told us. Basically saying that with an Obama presidency, we would be seeing a return of the Muslim Brotherhood to Washington, and then moving America to join with the coalition of Iran, Russia, and China. Unbelievable. So let's move on to Lebanon. What is the huge deal of what's going on with Lebanon today, Dr. Kedar, with Israel and Lebanon having talked about finalizing the sea border between our two countries?
Well, this maybe some kind of negotiations between Israel and Lebanon is again the indirect result of the American sanctions on Iran, because on Syria, because of the Syrian behavior vis-a-vis their citizens, and Lebanon, the Lebanese economy was heavily hurt because of these sanctions on Syria one side and on Iran on the other side. Hezbollah also now is on the verge of bankruptcy. This is why Lebanon wants to take advantage of the gas which Lebanon has under the seabed of the Mediterranean, just like what Israel is doing for years already. And for this, they have to mark the naval border between Israel and Lebanon. And for this, you need negotiations. And this is actually what happens these days as we speak now. And so, again, the American pressure on Iran and Syria actually is bringing indirectly Lebanon and Israel to start negotiations with the consent of Hezbollah. Means that if you want to have peace in the Middle East, you should maintain more and more and more pressure on Iran in order to make sure that this country stops its influence on countries which want to live in the Middle East. Because Iran wants to devastate the Middle East in order to take it over and to have a new path to the Mediterranean. This is what the Iranian dream. And as long as the United States continues with this pressure on Iran, the Middle East goes forward towards peace.
It's really
Abi, you're frozen. I hear nothing.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Kedar?
Okay, now yes. Your picture was frozen for like half a minute.
Gotta love technology. Sometimes it works perfectly, and other times it gives you trouble. I was saying that this is really an amazing development, considering for years Iran via Hezbollah has had such a hold on Lebanon that you really could not differentiate between Hezbollah and the state of Lebanon. And what we're witnessing today is finally a potential independent state of Lebanon acting independently of Iranian Hezbollah interests.
No, it's not independently. Iran allowed Hezbollah to allow the Lebanese state to start negotiations with Israel, because
Okay,
Iran knows the situation in Lebanon, the dire situation in Lebanon, and Iran would swallow this bitter pill of negotiations with Israel in order to save their Lebanese project. And this is what happened.
That's a very, very important clarification. Again, you're basically saying this is not a step of showing Lebanese independence separate from Hezbollah, but rather it's still all under the control of Iran and Hezbollah. They're just allowing it because of the dire financial situation they are in with running their Lebanese project.
The Iranians want to save Lebanon as it is controlled by Hezbollah, that Lebanon is not, let's say, becomes a failing state and controlled by France, for example, as some Lebanese wanted. They wanted France to come back to Lebanon, to control Lebanon, and to make order in Lebanon, new order in Lebanon. And this is the last thing which Iran wants, because if France comes, France will dismantle Hezbollah, because the French, they don't play games, as they did in Mali. If you remember, where the French went to Mali in order to dismantle the ISIS, or the ISIS branch of Mali, a couple of years ago. And the same thing, Iran is afraid that if France comes to Lebanon, France will not play games with them, and will actually act against Hezbollah decisively and firmly. So Iran allowed Hezbollah to allow Lebanon to start negotiations with Israel in order to show the French that they don't have to come, that, hey, we are getting better from the financial point of view because we are going to dig for the gas in the Mediterranean with the consent of Israel, because we marked the borders already.
So if I understand you correctly, then what we're witnessing is something that will, meaning Israel and Lebanon having talks to agree on these borders so Lebanon can make money from the gas and the waters, in a sense, benefits Hezbollah and Iran. So then if that is a correct assessment, my question is, why is it in Israel's best strategic interest to have these talks? Because we want Iran and Hezbollah to be pushed out of Lebanon so Lebanon can become an independent state again. So isn't it better for Israel to not come to an agreement, not allow Lebanon and Iran and Hezbollah earn all this money from the gas in the ground, so that the Iranian project of Lebanon continues to go bad, so that Hezbollah and Iran will be pushed out of Lebanon?
No. First of all, Hezbollah is a Lebanese organization. You cannot push them out. You can take the weapons out of their hands, this yes, but not push them out. They are Lebanese people, first of all. Secondly, what Israel hopes is that Iran collapses or implodes, and the Ayatollah regime will collapse. And this will stop the Iranian intervention in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and in Lebanon, in a way which will enable these states to come back to their healthy form and go forward maybe to peace with Israel, once they are liberated from the Iranian octopus. And this is what we hope, that Lebanon will survive as a state in spite of the Iranian intervention by supporting Hezbollah. And on the other side, Israel hopes that one day, thanks to the sanctions of the Americans and everything which America is doing against Iran, the Iranian regime will collapse. And this will actually, I would say, reunite the Middle East, But this situation will be when Israel is already part of it, with peace agreements with the Emirates, with Bahrain, we already have with Egypt, with Jordan. So Israel will not be rejected, even if the Middle East comes to its health back as a one, let's say, a group of countries which once they were. The Iranian influence actually is devastating the Middle East and changing the whole thing here. And this is why Iran should be toppled, or the Iranian regime should be toppled, turn into a peaceful country vis-a-vis other countries, including the Middle East, and will let the Middle East be what it wants to be, rather than intervene in the issues of the Middle East and turn it into what the Ayatollah Khamenei said, the strategic backyard of the Iranian people.
Yeah, and it's important to mention, and I know you agree with this, I'm just putting it out there for people not familiar with Iran or the Middle East like we are. Israel, we do not have a problem with the Iranian people. We had a very close relationship with the Iranian people. We love the Iranian people like us. Our problem is not the Iranians. Our problem is the Shiite Islamic regime of Iran. That is a problem not just to Israel and the world, but also to the Iranian people. So it's the best benefit of the Iranian people also for them to have freedom by being rid of the Islamic Shiite regime. So that just a clarification for everyone. Final issue I wanted to bring up, really surprising headline we wake up to the past couple of days, that Syria is now interested in making a deal with Israel. And the headline was, what's their demand? That Israel gives the Golan Heights to Syria, but they are willing to talk. How are we supposed to look into this new development, Dr. Kedar?
Well, first of all, the reason for Bashar Assad even to think about anything with Israel is the financial problem which Syria faces, especially now when Syria wants to start to rebuild itself. You have no idea, Avi, how many buildings are totally useless in Syria. I'm talking about many thousands of buildings. They all have to be flattened and start again. Many neighborhoods, even cities, towns, villages are totally destroyed. The infrastructure of the state, the railway system, the electricity system, water supply system, sewage. Avi, without sewage, you cannot live anywhere in the world because you will get cholera and all kinds of typhoid and everything which come from places with no sewage. And sewage needs electricity. So all these things have to be rebuilt in Syria. And Syria has no penny in order to pay for this. Syria needs money. And money today is a very problematic thing. They want investors. There are investors, potential investors in Europe. There are potential investors in the United States, maybe in other places, maybe in China. And they need investments. But nobody will invest a penny in Syria if Syria is in a state of war with other countries, especially Israel. Because nobody wants to invest money in war zones, because the war will come and destroy everything. So Bashar Assad understood that if he wants Europeans and Americans and many others to invest in Syria in order to rebuild this poor country after it was destroyed by Assad himself and by the Russians who carpet bombed towns and cities in Syria in order to get rid of ISIS and other organizations. So in order to get some money, some investments, he needs peace with Israel. Otherwise, no money. And this is what actually pushes him, more or less like the bankruptcy of Lebanon. So when these countries now want to rebuild themselves, they have to settle some issues with Israel.
That's unbelievable. But still, I mean, even now, there's still fighting going on. Dr. Kedar, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you after like a minute, which I didn't hear you, and then there is again a frozen picture.
Okay. So I was saying, right now there is still ongoing fighting in parts of Syria. It's not as if all the conflict, all the violence is over. There's still ongoing fighting between different militias. And the second issue I wanted to bring up is, if I'm not mistaken, Syria still is very much part of the Iranian project, very much a vassal state of Iran. So again, how much should Israel be taking seriously and being pursuing peace talks with Syria, considering this situation, this very problematic situation that Syria is still in?
Well, again, the Iranian financial problem have very significant influence on the Iranian intervention in Syria. And the money which they could use years ago, they don't have them now because of the American sanctions. And Syria might feel less inside the Iranian grip. Or maybe this grip is loosened a little bit in the last couple of months or even more because of the financial problems in Iran. And this is thanks to the American sanctions on Iran. And this is what I keep saying, that the less Iran can influence the Middle East, the more are the chances of peace in this region.
I mean, I think it's fascinating, the information you just gave to us on very, very harsh and serious implications on the Middle East and then the world with these upcoming U.S. elections. And again, I'm going to say it out loud, but I want you to repeat it, because I'd love to get a soundbite of you saying this. But basically, you said, one, U.S. implications if President Trump is not in office anymore and the JCPOA Iranian deal goes back, then Iran turns back into the menace that it was, creating havoc across the Middle East and sending more Arab Muslim refugees around the world to Europe and America. Two, with regards, again, if President Trump is out and a Joe Biden comes in and he returns the warm relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, then all of a sudden we have Muslim Brotherhood operatives in in positions of influence in Washington that would also be making things much more dangerous for America and obviously us in the Middle East. And because of U.S. sanctions under President Trump, you're basically telling us that's why we're seeing this seismic shift of Lebanon coming to Israel to have talk over boundaries, and Syria potentially coming to a deal because Iran is so weak. However, if Trump is no longer in office and the JCPOA is returned, then Iran will be emboldened, and all those changes vis-a-vis Lebanon and Syria will also go by the wayside because they'll be returned to be vassal states totally under the grip of Iran.
Yeah, this is more or less to sum the points.
I want you to sum that up. I just did it, but I want you to sum it up in your words.
No, it's okay. This is a good bottom line of what we presented here, and I think that and you know recently there is a clip which is running in the social media about John Kerry, how he understood the Middle East. And let me share screen with you and the audience.
Is it letting you share your screen?
Here it is. Oh no, it's not this. You have to cut it out. Where are we? Here.
Are you looking for the John Kerry video clip?
Yes. Will you be able to insert it?
Hold on one second. Let me try to search for it myself to bring it up for the video. If everyone will be patient with us as we try to bring it up. Do you have the link to send me? Because I don't have the link. Oh, here I got it. Ready? I found it.
Yeah. Okay, so
hold on 1 second. I'm gonna play it 1 second. Let me share the screen now that I got it. And let me share the screen. John Kerry. Okay, here we go.
I've heard several prominent politicians in Israel sometimes saying, well, the Arab world's in a different place now. We just have to reach out to them and we can work some things with the Arab world and we'll deal with the Palestinians. No, 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 and no. I can tell you that, reaffirmed even in the last week as I have talked to leaders of the Arab community. There will be no advance, separate peace with the Arab world without the Palestinian process and Palestinian peace. Everybody needs to understand that. That is a hard reality.
Unbelievable. Yes, Dr. Kedar, what is your insight on that?
Okay, he was right. John Kerry was right. Because in the political situation of 2015 or 16, when he was speaking, when the Obama administration was there, he was right.
He was right for then. He was right for then and the Obama-Biden policy.
Yes, because he, Kerry, and Hillary Clinton, and their boss, Obama, emboldened Iran to such a degree that every country was afraid to proceed with Israel unless the Palestinian issue is solved. However, today,
Dr. Kedar, this time you froze. So go back to your sentence. You were saying Kerry, Biden, Obama, and Biden emboldens Iran. That's the sentence you were saying.
I'll say it. John Kerry was right by saying it, because in those days when he and Hillary Clinton were the secretaries of state and Barack Obama was the president, this was a situation that no Arab country would dare go forward with Israel to any kind of peace because they were all afraid of Iran. Because Iran was so emboldened by the American administration to a degree that everyone was shaking and shivering from Iran because of the support of the American administration to Iran. Now, since the American policy was changed, the Iranian ability to maintain pressure on states in the Gulf, which are actually under the nose of the Iranians, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, now they feel much more comfortable to go forward with Israel because Iran now is under the heavy pressure of America, under the heavy problems of the economy because of the sanctions. And Iran today is much less capable to maintain pressure on these Arab countries, maybe also because of the getting rid of Qasem Soleimani, who was the agitator of all the problems in the Middle East, supported by the Iranians. So the Trump administration policies vis-a-vis Iran actually enabled the Middle East, or this part of the Middle East, which is not in the Iranian pact, to develop its relations with Israel, as we saw with the Emirates and Bahrain, which signed not a peace agreement, normalization agreement, which is much further than, much better than only peace, which we have with Egypt and Jordan. And this also came because of the Saudis gave their consent, no doubt, only because Iran today is under the American pressures. If these pressures are lifted, maybe they will be forced by Iran to cut their ties with Israel, the Emirates and Bahrain. And this might be a very, very dangerous implication of the fact or the possibility that Trump will come out of the White House. And this, people do not understand this. Because here in the Middle East, things are being done by pressures, by intimidation, by a credible threat. This is the only way how to change things in the Middle East, because this is not America here. This is not Europe. Okay? The Middle East has its own rules. And only the American pressure could create a situation that these countries, the Emirates and Bahrain, with the consent of the Saudis, have a peace with Israel against the will of Iran. What will happen if Iran will be boldened again by another American administration? Just imagine.
So you basically preempted my final question, my follow-up question to this, because people who support President Joe Biden to become president might say, well, these normalization agreements were made. This process with Lebanon and Syria is moving forward. If Joe Biden becomes president, nothing will change. He'll just change his relationship with Turkey, with Iran or whatever, but everything done on all these great things for Israel will remain. And you're basically saying we can't necessarily count on that.
Well, again, you have to understand the Middle East. We had agreements, peace agreements, with Tunisia and with Qatar. And we had actually an Israeli representation, commercial representation in the capitals of these two countries, with an Israeli flag on these buildings for a couple of years between the mid-90s and the beginning of the 2000s in Qatar and Tunisia. Yet those agreements were shoved under the rug because of some reasons. Okay? The Middle East is not as steady as the Americans imagine. The Middle East is built on sand dunes. And these sand dunes change their position according to the situation of the wind. As we say in Hebrew, matzav haruach. The situation of the wind means, it has other meaning, but dunes are changing, shifting sands of the Middle East. Nothing here is steady. This is why you have to be very firm and very decisive if you want to survive in this unfortunate Middle East. Being weakened makes you a very easy prey for predators like Iran. And this is why I think that if the Americans show leniency towards the Iranians, they will be emboldened again, and they can cause a cancellation or a freezing of anything which they want with the Emirates, because the Emirates are shaking and shivering, or at least were shaking and shivering from the Iranians, just like the Bahrainis, until recently. And who knows, maybe they also hope that the Trump administration will continue to control the world, at least the Middle East, rather than another administration which will again embolden Iran.
Dr. Kedar, it is always a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your very, very important insights. And again, it's not, people might think, oh, this is only information that that's important for us in Israel or for Arab Muslims in the Middle East. But no, people don't understand the ramifications on the whole world upon what happens in the Middle East. So thank you for giving us a window more into understanding that.
Thank you so much, Avi, for giving the pulpit. And let's hope for better times.
Amen, as they say. Amen, and stay healthy with you and your family, Dr. Kedar.
Thank you so much. You too.
And for everyone watching, thank you very, very much for joining us for another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our ancestral and eternal homeland. Hope you enjoyed today's information with Dr. Kedar. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Shalom from the eternal ancestral homeland of the Jewish people.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.